Welcome to our final webinar of Field Inclusive Week about mental health and nature. We're excited for you to meet our speaker momentarily. My name is Kayla Stukes. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a current second-year master's student at North Carolina State University, pursuing my degree in forestry. I am also an intern for Field Inclusive, a new nonprofit working towards amplifying and supporting marginalized and historically excluded biologists and researchers who professionally work in the outdoors. Shortly, I will introduce our speaker, but first, I would like to give a special thanks to our sponsor of Field Inclusive Week, the Nature Conservancy. Thank you for coming on board as a sponsor beginning in the fall of 2022, and for being dedicated to promoting and supporting more inclusive outdoors. It is through organizations like yours and the many individuals who donate to our organization that we can continue our mission and the goals in raising awareness when it comes to social field safety issues by hosting events like Field Inclusive Week, as well as providing financial support to marginalized and historically excluded individuals who professionally work outdoors. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's discussion. Nicole Jackson is a native of Cleveland, Ohio. She graduated from The Ohio State University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Education and Interpretation. A nature enthusiast, park advocate, and bird watcher, she loves spending time outdoors and also has a passion for getting people connected to the wonders of nature of the world. Nicole currently works as a nature coach and environmental education consultant, assisting in nonprofits to create programs that educate youth and families on how to build a healthy relationship with nature. Her coaching focuses on increasing the benefits of connecting to nature for Black women, including their mental health and well-being. The Foster Connection is creating opportunities for improved self-awareness, healthier practice for healing, and more space for joy and self-exploration. She is also a board member of the Columbus Audubon, co-organizer of Black Birders Week, and founder of Black and National Parks Week. A huge welcome and special thanks to Nicole today for agreeing to share her time and expertise with our audience members. Audience, please feel free to submit questions for Nicole through the Q&A portion, which will be towards the end of our discussion today. Now, without further ado, I will pass it off to Nicole.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Kayla, and thank you again, Field Inclusive, for having me as a featured speaker for Field Inclusive Week. I am very excited to be here, and I'm excited to talk a little bit more about my work and how that has kind of weaved into thinking more about my mental health and helping others think about their mental health in professional workspaces, academic spaces. I'm going to start with just my presentation and kind of introducing myself and some of the things I'll go through as we move forward in today's presentation. Field work recovery is the hashtag. So let's get started. And if anyone, I would like to know if anyone is interested in sharing where they're viewing from. I would love to know. I'm based in Columbus, or I live in Columbus, Ohio, but I'm from Cleveland. So please feel free to share that in the chat. All right, so my talk is called Mental Health and Nature. Again, focuses on how we think about our mental health when we're wanting to find time to heal, to reset from the work that we do as academics, as educators, as professionals in general. So I would like to start the presentation with a little bit more about me and my background. So this is a picture of me at, I'm blanking on the site I was at, but this was a field site where I was doing research on Acadian flycatchers, and this is local in Columbus, Ohio. So we worked with my supervisor and some grad students on those specific populations and focusing on their breeding habitat, as well as studying northern cardinals. So northern cardinals and Acadian flycatchers are part of my field research when I was attending The Ohio State University as a freshman. So it's very, very crazy time because it was my first engagement with field research and working out in the field. So I definitely have some stories to share about that. And I'm excited to kind of explain that, but also just go into some of the things that I've learned along the way. So I'm just sharing this picture because I realized in doing my field research, I didn't take a lot of photos, which I kind of am sad about, especially being a young Black woman interested in nature and wanting to explore career opportunities within the environment. So I wish I'd had taken time and like just had more space and time to have pictures taken of me doing the work, or taking pictures of myself. And this was, I think, 2009 is when I started my internship, and during the summer. So again, a little bit about my background. Some of it was mentioned in the introduction. I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. My early childhood memories, I was just a really curious young girl. I was always reading books and watching a bunch of, nature shows. Those are my favorite things just because I learned so much and I just loved animals and wildlife and nature in general. I was also very reserved and observant, so I didn't have an outgoing personality, but inside my head, I felt very extroverted. It just didn't come out externally. But I guess that was in the form of my curious brain. But on the outside, a lot of people just assume I was just like really shy and quiet. My family, I grew up with 10 siblings, 7 sisters and 3 brothers, raised by a single parent in inner city Cleveland. It was a very tough time for my mom, raising 11 children on her own, and having to depend on governmental assistance to help her raise us. But we did have a lot of, good times growing up together and going to the same schools, growing up in the same the neighborhoods, and we had a lot of friends and extended family that we could lean on during those hard times. Earlier on, I guess my career interests focused on just things where I could be like in quieter spaces and places where I could focus on kind of doing things by myself and learning by myself in isolation. So like a librarian, a veterinarian, scientist, writer, where I could have peace and quiet just because I was raised in such a big family and a lot of my siblings are, I would say, a little bit more extroverted than I am. So it was just always fun, but also loud and overwhelming sometimes being around that many people growing up. So I liked my alone time. So these, in researching, I guess, looking up more of these careers, I felt like they would be more suited for me. And then as far as my education, I eventually moved to Columbus, Ohio to explore what I wanted to do in terms of a long-term career. And by the end of that, I ended up getting my Bachelor of Science in Natural Resources with a focus in environmental education and interpretation. My major was Parks, Recreation, and Tourism. So I will talk a little bit about that. So in the beginning, I wanted to do veterinary medicine, which is essentially why I moved to Columbus. I think Ohio State was the only program in Ohio. And I think it's harder, I heard, to get in vet school than med school because there's not a lot of actual like programs, college graduate programs. So, and I didn't want to move away out of state from my family because it was just a lot to process. I was the first one in my family to go to college, so that would have been way too much for me to handle going out of state somewhere. So I was about 2-hour drive away from home, which was definitely more convenient for me, especially not being a driver. I don't have a license. So I would often catch the Greyhound or carpool with friends to get back and forth to visit family. Eventually, I decided not to do veterinary medicine, realized it was so competitive. And again, I was just starting out as a college student and I didn't want to overwhelm myself in that way. So I ended up exploring a bunch of other majors, so animal sciences, wildlife science, which presented this opportunity of this avian field technician internship that I talked about in my introduction. And it was more to just explore what opportunities were out there for me beyond veterinary medicine, because I'm wanting to do that and had such an interest since I was maybe like 11 or 12 for veterinary medicine. So having to make that shift was really difficult, but I'm still very interested in learning what else was out there. So eventually I came across this field research opportunity and found out about field research in general. I didn't know it was a thing. I didn't know it was an opportunity that could be a part of my college experience. And it was just something really fun and engaging, something to challenge myself and different to try. So my advisor at the time encouraged me to apply and work with her grad students, and we would be visiting the different parks, metro parks and city parks to do the field research, which ended up working out for me because I didn't really know too much about Columbus. And it was, again, like fish out of water. I didn't really have a support system as far as people and that I could go to and talk to about my experience. It was pretty much just me by myself. So really having to navigate that loneliness, but also still focus on my studies and figure out what I wanted to do. All right, fast forward, because I don't want to talk about all about my college stuff, but within those experiences of working as and doing field research, and this really connects to my relationship with nature. In doing that internship, I learned a lot about myself, especially having so much time in solitude and collecting data and meeting people and navigating the landscape. I learned a lot about the actual parks that I was visiting, where they were, how to locate them on a map, things like that. But also I had a lot of time to spend by myself. So I learned a lot about what I needed to thrive, questions that I had in terms of my career aspirations, who I could connect with, where I could find support, and where the actual, the potential for that research that was being done and the data that was being collected, where that could lead me professionally. Because it wasn't set in stone at the time of what I actually wanted to do after completing my field research, but it was more of just giving myself a challenge and seeing how far I could go with engaging with other students and grad students and thinking about, I guess, the layers of my profession or possible profession. So all of that has helped me kind of fold in those lessons into the work that I do as an environmental educator. And I've been doing that for the past decade in informal education. So a lot of summer camps, after school programs, community programs, working with youth. So it wasn't anything where I, the formal, I guess, needing a teaching license and working in a school setting, K through 12 school setting, but I did work with students in a community capacity. So that really just helped me think more about how mental health isn't really a focus when it comes to a lot of these environments for youth, for families, for professionals, to really kind of embrace and realize that it needs to be a part of their work and their everyday, just as much as a job or being able to feed yourself and make money to take care of yourself. So fast forward to all of that into 2020. So 2020 was a crazy year, as we all know, the start of the pandemic, but also, issues around racial justice, injustice, and thinking about our mental health as a society and where that was taking us, and really forcing us to pause to really think about our well-being outside of making a living. And what that meant for me was going in and out of spaces where I couldn't really compartmentalize things anymore. Like it was just, everything was just a heavy weight, and I needed to find time and a way to deal with it. So in 2020, There was the George Floyd murder, but also the start of and creation of Black Birders Week, and having ideas around the discussions that we have as students, as researchers, as professionals in these environmental spaces that people say are safe and say give us solace and a time to kind of just unwind and find balance. But that wasn't the case for all of us, especially Black people. And having to understand what that meant, just it took a lot more work than I was expecting, working as a professional at a university. So at the time I was working as a program coordinator, and having to make these transitions from going to in-person events to online events wasn't really a challenge for me, but realizing how much of a challenge it was for other people. But I had created this relationship with nature when I was really, really, really young, out of trauma that I experienced when I was a young girl, which kind of helped me kind of see beyond the veil and what was really happening, the reality of what we were going to be facing moving forward, whether it's, you know, by ourselves or with family or with community. It was going to be an uphill battle. So in that time, I was working with a friend who we just came together, brainstormed on like just thinking about ways to connect women of color, Black women specifically, to come together to create a space for us to release all of that anxiety and have conversations, hard conversations about what we were going through, what we were feeling. And 2020 was an election year. So all of these things were happening. So we came together, we put together this retreat that focused on us being in nature and coming together and focusing on the hard stuff that we were facing as individuals, but within our community as Black women. And I had my own concerns about my mental health and, you know, my anxiety. There's definitely depression, feeling overwhelmed, feeling like the walls are closing in on me. I couldn't really talk to anybody about what I was feeling just because it was just compounded from other things. Like even before the pandemic started, I was already stressed. So having this retreat just really put things in perspective for me of why we need more of these spaces and why we need to have an understanding of why being outside and connecting to nature needs to be a part of our everyday and not just for a moment, but for the rest of our journey on this earth, and really honing in on why that relationship is beneficial and why it's important, so that we can heal ourselves and help others heal as well. So in terms of field work, this is not like a specific specialty of mine or expertise, but just going off of my own experience as an avian field technician, there are things that I did not think about doing during that internship that I think would have been so helpful for me to learn and to like better understand like the importance of communication when you're working with other researchers, other field scientists, and like your supervisors, even your faculty, coworkers, all of that. So I always was, you know, where should I start? Sorry, I totally messed that up. Where should I start instead of where should I do? But also thinking about like what information was really important for me to have, or would have been important for me to have before I even started my field work, in terms of thinking about my mental health and the stress and the anxiety that comes with doing that. So for me, it was important to think about information that I needed, whether it was from the institution itself, things from my community, things that I knew about myself that other people needed to know in order to better take care of myself. And then having the discussion early and often with the people that you're working with was something that was really crucial. So before, again, thinking about the actual field work itself, it would have been helpful for me to create a list of important information. So medications, if I was taking anything, because a lot of times we're thinking about going into these spaces where you do have pre-existing mental conditions that you've been dealing with for a long time. And there are certain ways that you have to manage and address those things. So bringing that into a new work environment can be very stressful. And having an understanding of how to communicate that to the people that you're working with, I think really helps lessen that and overwhelmingness and that anxiety around having the best fieldwork experience for yourself. So that includes mental health, making note of mental health conditions or diagnoses, healthcare professionals, doctor contact information is good to have, emergency contacts, whether it be through the university itself or the field site, if they have a specific person at the field site that you need to contact when you're going through something or need help and managing your mental health. This information, I feel like it's really, really important to have. And then a big other part of it, a layer of it, is a support system. So having a support system, having a support team is good internally, but you want to have one externally as well. So internally, again, it's your peers, it's the people that you're working with that you can lean on and trust. That may not be everybody that you're working with, but making sure that you have that communication and understanding of who you can go to if you encounter an issue or a problem around, things like safety, having access to things that you need with your medication, travel, costs, emergency contacts, things like that. And then externally, it's your support system, that involves your family, that involves your friends, and understanding that the support team outside of work is just as important as the one internally. So having the discussion with the people that you've chosen, and it can be a handful, it doesn't have to be a bunch of people that you have decided that would be helpful for you to thrive and get the support that you need. Having a conversation with them is really helpful. So again, making a list and sharing that, in terms of your symptoms when you're going through your mental health situation or crises, like any of that is helpful. Coping strategies. So I like, when I feel really anxious, I need to step away and I need to breathe, do some deep breathing. Sometimes I'll just need to sit for a minute with quiet, like nobody talking to me. Sometimes I'll need to call someone to help calm me down, just as an opportunity for me to find space in a healthy way to reset, so it doesn't boil over. Reminders are good, especially if you have a support system that knows you and understands okay, if this happens, okay, I'm just going to remind you that you're experiencing some anxiety, you need to do this. So just having someone to help remind you of what you're dealing with, I think is comforting versus it being kind of not in a judgy way, but more so, I noticed that this is happening. I remember you saying you need this in order to feel better, ... And then something also helpful is if it helps to tell the person or your support team, it helps if. So for me, it could be, it helps if you tell a joke or you make me laugh. That's a distraction for me to get me out of my head around negative thinking. Or if I feel like I'm going through something really difficult, I feel like I always need a distraction from that, and hearing someone else's, about their day, or them telling a joke or making me laugh or something like that, to where they're engaged with you, but it's also helping you get out of that negative, anxious mindset. So in terms of thinking about those two things and piecing those things together, so this is before, and then more so during. So the before and during, you want to make sure that you're creating, again, these spaces kind of protection for yourself as you're going through your field work. And again, the internal and external, as I mentioned before, having the peer support network. So people that you work with, people that take classes with you or courses are really helpful. You might decide, to have a writing group or a group text that helps when you're going through really difficult things involving your mental health with a small group or a friend, as well as places to go, to eat, grab a drink, where you can kind of decompress and not necessarily have to think about work all the time. And then having a mental health option plan is really good. Again, going back to the previous slide of, again, making that list around the support system that you have, whether it's with your coworkers, faculty, people in your community, is really helpful to have that just in case something does happen. So externally, therapy, if that is needed, you don't want to replace, I guess, very basic, like make that your everything, like very basic things or everything. You want to make sure that if it's something really serious and that gets out of, of hand where you could potentially harm yourself or someone else, like seek professional help, therapy, because I feel like it's only supplemental. But if you really are in an emergency, dire situation, I would reach out to a professional and don't feel like you need to take it into your own hands. Friends and family, I feel like this is great support just because they know you. I feel like they know you better than kind of the professional peers that you work with. So I feel like they would be more in tune with what's going on with you and noticing things that you aren't necessarily paying attention to when you're going through mental health issues, and realizing, okay, you're more quiet than usual, or you didn't laugh at this, thing that I said that you would usually laugh at. So it's like noticing those things and pointing that out, I think, is really helpful. And having conversations, again, around you experiencing hard things as you're going through field work. I think for me, it was more of feeling isolated because I worked a lot with white people. Like there was no other me. So there's so many concerns about my health and my well-being, more mental and emotional than physical. But because they didn't have similar experiences around things like microaggressions or racism, it was hard for me to just have those conversations without feeling like I was going to cause more problems or they were going to look at me differently. And, even things about my hair, like I knew I couldn't wear my hair in a fro out in the field. I had to have it braided, and, to them, it was just like, oh, you have this new hairstyle. And I'm like, oh, I'm doing it out of convenience because I don't want to get, branches and all that stuff stuck in my hair and have to pull it out later. So making a big deal of that, and in my mind, it's not a big deal, but for them, it's just like this, this sudden change, like, wow, this is like, you're different. And I'm like, no, I'm not really. I'm just making sure that I'm paying attention to the work that I'm doing, but also making it work for me. And having that conversation was difficult. I don't think I thought about it a lot, but I actually didn't have the conversation of the issues I had with it and the concerns that I had about just feeling comfortable and sharing those things out loud. And then community care, it's good to have community. I am very introverted. I like being by myself. I like being alone. It doesn't bother me. I like being in nature. It's really helpful in helping me deal with my anxiety, my depression. But sometimes I really do need other people to help me get through things, especially if it involves um, battles that I can't fight myself. So some things might involve information that you need that you didn't know existed to help you get through a problem in order to find the best solution that works for you. And for me, I did not ask enough of that, of, what happens if I'm harassed out in the field by someone from the public, or if I injure myself, or if I forget to bring my medication out in the field, and it becomes a really serious situation. So even thinking about emergency contacts, like I didn't think about that when I was out, because my family was in Cleveland. Like I felt like they were just going to see it as this odd thing that I'm doing anyway. Why are you out in the woods studying birds? But it still would have been helpful to let them know, like, this is where I am, this is my location, this is how long I'm going to be there. I don't care if it's weird, but like these things are important. So I think having that understanding of the hard conversations, but the needed conversations is really important. So moving forward with just kind of some, I guess, recommendations for me and thinking about my story, and being out in nature has always been something I've been drawn to since I was younger. So it's just easy for me to it's kind of like a second language for me to be in nature and just be still and be present and noticing things. But a lot more of the conversations around microaggressions and racism and inclusivity and equity and all of that stuff started to come up more in my college years that I didn't necessarily thought, I didn't need to think about. But really focusing in on how that impacted my mental health is something that's so much more important to me now. Even though I'm no longer a student, I do still work with students in some capacity and helping them navigate those spaces and helping them understand that they're not the only one has been a reward for me, for sure. So and being out in the field, I was working, how long was I working? I was doing 6 days a week, 3 months, I think, 3.5 months, and then up in like 4 in the morning, done at like 4 in the afternoon for 6 days. And never done anything like that in my life before. Like it was exhausting. I was exhausted. And then it got to a point where it was affecting, I have iron deficiency anemia. So I do have to focus on my iron intake and feeling, depleted, not hydrating myself, not having the proper nutrition was a big factor in me doing that field work. So it got to a point where I wasn't even paying attention to my health enough to where I was having heart palpitations. And it scared the heck out of me because, again, it was something I wasn't familiar with and experienced for the first time, and I didn't know what to do about it. So I would have to, at the time, tell a family member, like, hey, this is what's going on. And then they suggested, like, hey, you're going to have to make an appointment with the doctor. This is really, this could get really serious. You need to take better care of yourself. So things like that, where I just never in a million years I thought I'd have to think about any of that, but it really did play a role in, feeling like, okay, I could push through this or I can work through it. It's fine. But realizing it was taking a toll on my body, the day-to-day work that I had to do, whether it was the physical, the mental, sometimes the emotional, especially things happening out in the world that was affecting me mentally and emotionally, but I couldn't really talk about, being a young Black woman working in those spaces. So I did a lot of, when I had free time, my biggest focus was sleep, just getting sleep and resting my body. And not even just like sleeping, like, your full 8 hours, but also just taking time to meditate or to write about my experiences, or having time to talk to friends and family versus like, oh, I just, all my time is going into taking courses or doing this field work and there's no social time. So kind of really making sure that I was doing okay for myself, at least, before reaching out to other people and realizing like, okay, there's something that doesn't feel right, or it feels off, or I don't feel like myself, I need to do something about it. And building in those practices for myself to do better in a workspace that wasn't always nurturing for me. So with the recommendations, I would do a lot of nature walks. And again, this internship, even though it was really stressful and it was the first time I've ever done field work, it opened me up to so many opportunities to explore the parks where I lived. So all of the places where the field sites were, I got to learn about, the trails and the types of birds and the trees. The people that would come through, there's a lot of bikers, there was runners, people walking their dogs, families using those parks. And essentially, that's what got me into wanting to do environmental education, was that experience, because I wanted to connect more to the natural world and to the people using those urban spaces. So I would take a lot of nature walks near where I lived, and you can do that on your own if you feel okay with that, if you feel safe. If you don't, reach out to someone that you trust and feel safe with to do those things. I would always take photos, take pictures of your outings. You don't necessarily need to share those with anybody, just for you. I actually bought a camera for myself after I left my university job in 2021. And it was the best thing I've done for myself, because it's another way outside of bird watching for me to connect with nature and just see its beauty from a different perspective. And any of the pictures that you've seen are pictures that I've taken. So in this one, it's a heron, and it has the green on its breeding plumage or breeding colors for the male. So journaling, writing, and again, these things don't have to be for anybody else's eyes. You can just do this for you. I find it's always therapeutic for me to just jot down things that I'm feeling versus feeling like I have to write paragraphs. Meditating, video or audio diary. I don't know if anybody's done this, but I've recently done this practice of, if I'm thinking something and I want to get out of my head, I'll just record myself talking about it. And then sometimes I'll go back and listen to it and reflect on those thoughts. And then audio, if you don't want to see yourself on video, just record your voice. And I feel like that's just helpful. It's kind of like another form of a diary. So if that's something you're interested in, feel free to try that and add it as a practice for yourself. And then challenge yourself. Try something new. For me, it was photography. I've been birding for over 10 years, but photography, it's something I'd never tried, but I was always interested in. So I decided to buy myself a camera and just, see what was out, explore more of what was in my backyard. So birding, photography, birding is a really awesome thing that's been growing since 2020. More people are doing it, whether it be outings in their community or backyard birding through feeding birds. Photography is really cool. Writing and art. If anybody is interested in painting or sketching things, I feel like that's another way to help with your mental health. And then setting boundaries. Again, just if you want to read through those, I'm going to read all of them, but the first two are really awesome. Take care of your own needs by saying no to things that do not serve your purpose. Protect your physical and emotional space from distractions that can potentially take you off track. And that is it. So I'm going to wrap up. But if anybody's interested in connecting, this is my information. In Her Nature is a business that focuses on nature therapy specifically for Black women. So I only work with Black women. I'm just going to put that out there just because that's something that's really near and dear to me and important to me. And it originated from just thinking about my mom, again, having to raise 11 children as a single Black mother and not really seeing her get a chance to explore her own interests, to rest, to create, to manifest. So that's something that I wanted to see more of in the spaces that I reside in, but also I'm still an environmental educator. I still explore other opportunities to educate people about the importance of nature connection. So outside of my nature coaching, there's always opportunities if anyone's interested in connecting with me around that work. So this is my business information. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and then my email. Website, I'm still working out kinks for that, but it will be up soon. So I'm sure Field Inclusive will be posting that once it's up and ready. Thank you for that. And that is all for me. Thank you all.
This was a wonderful presentation, Nicole. Thank you once again for your expertise. We will now jump into the Q&A portion of our discussion. So if you haven't already, you can direct your questions to the Q&A box. And I'll start with our first question says, what is your best advice or ideas for combating bitterness and finding peace, joy, or rest despite your situation not being ideal?
So for me, that's a good question because as I mentioned before, it was my nature connection started out of trauma. I was in foster care with a sibling, and unfortunately we were abused for a few years, and then I think it was like 5 or 6. So I was really, really young, and it was really hard for me to process that, being that young and going through that trauma and abuse, and really just like losing hope for everything and everybody. Like I was just not okay with people in general, like humans, which is why I was very interested in careers and jobs where I could just be by myself. Because engaging with people, sharing and being vulnerable, like that was really hard for me to do. And because I built that relationship with nature and it allowed me to open myself up in a way that was very intimate, but also nurturing, like it allowed me to understand that I needed to start with understanding and loving myself before connecting with other people. So if I didn't love myself, if I didn't know myself, how am I going to convince other people to do the same? And being able to advocate for myself in a way that I knew would help me in any situation, and I can transfer more of that understanding into the things that bring me joy, that bring me peace for the rest of my life. Like anything that I'm going through that's hard and that's difficult, and I feel like we're all going to experience that all the time in different ways as we move through this life. What's your compass? Like what's keeping you, I guess, balanced enough for you to be like, okay, this is temporary. I'm going to get through this, but I have the tools to get through the trauma or the pain or the frustration or the loneliness a little bit easier than if I didn't have those tools. So for me, it was nature. For me, it was people. Eventually, it was back to people again, but people who championed me, who embraced me, who loved me, no matter what, whether I decided to go to school or whether I decided to just have a job. Like it was just more of like, I see you for you, and I know you're going to grow and improve and evolve. And those people I kept in my circle, my tight circle, so that if I wasn't feeling like I could do enough for myself, I could always reach out to that group of people to help uplift me and give me the nurturing and nourishment that I needed to get through life.
I completely agree with your answer. Thank you for sharing, Nicole. The next question says, how do you recommend fieldwork leaders initiate these conversations about mental health with students? These can be challenging and personal topics, and I worry about overstepping a student's boundaries.
I think it's whatever you decide is important to you, you should share. And it doesn't have to be every single thing, but that communication part, and it's always, I feel like it's never going to be easy. It's always going to be a challenge, but what is something, or what are things that are important to you that you know are going to impact your experience, whether it's at the beginning, middle, or end, and keep that communication going. And sometimes you'll have to pivot, you'll have to adjust. But if you do, I feel like if you don't say anything, then it's a lost opportunity for you to build yourself, I guess, to be more resilient in those situations, in case they happen again further down the line. So for me, it was, this did not happen within my field work, just again, because I didn't know what to talk about, who to talk about, until like later. It's like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I didn't have, like, why didn't I bring any of this stuff up? But I stopped beating myself up about that, and really just had an opportunity to show up again, I guess, advocate again for myself with those same concerns in my professional, just day-to-day, like office work job. And for me, being an introvert was like my mental kind of like safe space. Like me being an introvert was my thing. Like that's my comfort. I'm not going to try to change for anybody. I'm not going to try to be more extroverted for anybody. I need you to understand, like, this is what's working for me because I'm an introvert. Like having that conversation with my supervisor, and like, you hired me for a job, great, but I can't work like you. Like there's things that you're going to want me to do, and like tasks that need to be done. But as far as like personality and like social, things, like you're going to invite me to things, and most of the time I'm going to say no. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. It's just I want to protect my peace and my space, and like I know I get overwhelmed when I'm around a lot of people. So like having that conversation with my supervisor, even though it was hard in the beginning, it was like such a relief. I just took this like sigh of relief of like, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I did that, because my supervisor didn't really understand the importance of like understanding an introvert and like how they work. Like I can go weeks without needing a meeting or talking to them via email or via text or whatever, and they would just be like, oh my goodness, is something wrong? And I'm like, no, nothing's wrong. I just don't need that constant interaction. So like to be able to have that conversation before the big projects start or before the big work starts, I think relieves so much more stress for both people. And knowing that, okay, oh, this is why this is happening, because we have this conversation about ... And it again, only what you want to be in the conversation is what it will be. If you don't want it to talk about the personal stuff, you don't have to. But knowing that you have that autonomy to advocate for yourself should be like at the forefront of your brain, of like, oh, because I'm in this workspace, like I have to cut these parts of myself off and be in this robot manual mode, when I don't think that really helps anyone in those types of settings.
Thank you, Nicole. And then our next question is, you suggested thinking ahead about who you can talk to when you need support during time in the field. For those of us who are who are coordinating field programs, do you have suggestions for how we can help guide these new field research for less comfortable in nature, and thinking through who may be good support contacts for them?
Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily, I would say it doesn't necessarily have to be, I don't know, I'm thinking about, I guess, the external. So the people like your family, friends, someone you can trust and you can have an honest conversation with, and they can hold you accountable to things. So it's not just like a yes person, but like they're really wanting to like challenge you just as much as you're challenging them, to like have that trust and understanding of what you're talking about and what you're sharing. For me, like not all my family members understand, like to this day, why I have an interest in nature and the environment. Like, but I know I can talk to them about, going through tough situations, and how do you manage that without it necessarily connecting to the environment, but like it just helps me think about other people's perspectives. And then again, having the conversation and letting people know, like, hey, I want you to be my mentor. I want you to be my friend. Like, be specific with your needs. Like, I just want you to listen today because I'm just venting. Or I really need advice because I'm going to be making a decision later. I think the more specific you are with the people that you want to have involved, I guess, or be a part of your support system is really helpful for both of you. And not, I don't know, feeling like there's things you can't avoid. Like there's going to be awkwardness, there's going to be some uncomfortableness in some of the conversations, some confusion. Like it's just easier to be specific as possible. And then if that person, you feel like, okay, this isn't the right person or the right connection, don't feel bad or feel like you have to like keep that going just out of like, I don't want that person to think different of me. Like if it's not working, it's not working. Keep it moving. Like I just keep it moving because again, that takes time and energy to have those feelings and those thoughts of like, oh, this person, we didn't click. So then you're just harping on why it didn't click versus like, okay, I just need to find someone else. And that could be within, the school itself, and it doesn't have to connect to your major. It can be someone else, that you connected with in, the business department, or I don't know, science and academics. I don't know, something to where it's like, it doesn't have to connect to your specific major, but like maybe someone else, is doing a different type of field research or field work. But they've had similar experiences and can give you perspective and other tools that might be helpful in you being able to solve your own problems down the line. Hopefully that made sense.
I think so. Thank you for sharing. Do you have any tips for trusting yourself with your mental health again after you have experienced a lapse in caring for your symptoms, seeking help, etc.?
I was very hard on myself, realizing how introverted I was, but also around having anxiety and just like my attention span and like procrastinating a lot. I would beat myself up a lot about those things, and it would just snowball and like affect the rest of the things that I wanted to do, because again, it was just, I would just harp on that stuff so much. So now and I don't know if anybody else does this, but for me, I just talk to myself out loud. I have conversations with myself, whether it's in the mirror in the morning to get my day started, or as I'm going through something, like not feeling sorry for myself, not getting into a headspace of like, you're a failure because you're feeling this way or you're thinking this way, but like, I always tell me, I'm like, girl, you are going through it right now. Like sometimes I'll laugh about it. Other times I'm like, okay, this is a moment where I don't feel like myself and it's gonna pass. And some things, some realizations like, oh, I need to move my body to get out of this negative space, or I need to listen to music, or I need to go and meet with a friend and have a conversation. Or, again, I have like something that I have to think about my work schedule or my courses, to where it's like, okay, I don't feel like I'm being productive, or I don't feel like I'm engaged. Like, what conversation can I have that's going to help me move forward, or talk with myself that's going to help me move forward? And sometimes I have to list those things. Other times I'm just literally okay with feeling it. Like, okay, I'm feeling it right now. Just feel it. Just let it happen and it'll pass, without it feeling like I'm giving up on myself. Like it's going through the process of knowing that you're going through something, and that you're wanting to work through it to get to the other end.
I absolutely agree. I think we are just about out of time for questions. So we here at Field Inclusive would like to thank Nicole Jackson for joining us today. And we thank you for the work that you are doing and continue to do when it comes to educating others about mental health in nature and sharing your experience. I would also like to thank Field Inclusive CEO behind the scenes, Lauren Farr. Lauren, thank you for managing our Zoom webinar today. Again, we thank you to those who joined us today. We will continue these conversations as we further our initiative and work when it comes to amplifying social field safety issues. Please be sure to follow and interact with us on all of our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at the handle @FieldInclusive. Please also be sure to visit us on our website to learn more about our organization and ways that you as an individual or organization can support us. That concludes all of our webinars for Field Inclusive Week, but tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, we will have our science communication workshop hosted by myself and my other co-founder, Murray Burgess. We hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
And again, thank you, Nicole, for coming on today. Really appreciate you.
You're welcome. Glad I could be here.